Hi there, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining this Cloud Lunch and Learn. Today we have one more great session. Today I have here with me Marcel Lupo and ready to go to talk all about reusable GitHub workflows to automate a token. I'm Jackson Felden and will be your moderator for this next hour, I would say. And yeah, just excited for one more session here. And thanks very much again for you who is joining. If you're new on our Cloud Lunch and Learn, please scan the code you can see now in front of you. And from there, you can jump into Microsoft. Microsoft is always happy to share some additional material in terms of the let's say the subject we are presenting today. And then it's a good way for us as well just to track who is connecting and who is supporting our work we are doing here on Cloud Lunch and Learn. And yeah, let's say, Marcel, if you want to give just a quick intro about yourself, and then a few seconds I will share your screen, and then I would say the show is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Jackson, for having me again. It's great to be here again, to be able to talk. So for anyone who's not seen any of my stuff yet, my name's Marcel. I'm a DevOps architect manager at Avanade, and I like to blog and talk about automation, GitHub, and of course Azure, Microsoft's cloud provider. And yeah, I've been working in basically IT, security fields and technology for maybe 20 years or more now. So today's session, we're going to talk about some cool stuff in GitHub where we can use reusable workflows to automate service bus SaaS tokens to make it a little bit more secure, and just some cool feature of GitHub, which is different to Actions. It's using something called reusable workflows, which is similar to Actions, but they've got differences. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, Jackson.
Okay. Yeah, I need to say last session I learned quite a lot with you, and then you made very simple all the kind of the nightmare to manage different passwords and with different servers and services, and using GitHub you really made everything kind of looks very simple to remove this headache of managing different passwords and so on. Okay, and then everybody connecting from home, if you have any question during the session, please feel free to type your questions. And then I was talking to Marcel, I think just to make more dynamic, I will just present the session, the questions to Marcel and try to kind of tackle it straight away. Okay, that's pretty much it. I will share your screen now, Marcel. Yeah, that's it. And I would say the floor is yours. I will be here in the background. If you need anything from me, just let me know. Otherwise, yeah, take over, please.
All righty. Thank you very much. Sorry, I just went through the slides there very quickly. Okay, so as I said earlier, my name's Marcel. I'm a DevOps architect manager, and I'm going to talk today about the how we can use GitHub Action, GitHub reusable workflows to automate service bus tokens. And what I'm going to show here is, it's not necessarily can be applied to service bus tokens, but the concept is more towards reusable workflows and how they work. So I've got a demo workflow diagram here of what I'm going to demo basically. So for any of you who've not used GitHub Actions or GitHub, the automation within GitHub, you have something that's called workflows that you can trigger, and they're almost like very similar to in Azure DevOps, the multi-stage YAML pipelines. Now, something that's been kind of missing for me in GitHub, that is kind of almost normal to have in Azure DevOps, is the ability to have templates. So for example, you can have a pipeline that can then trigger, or not trigger, but call a different file or a different template to run, to extend your pipeline into more kind of manageable chunks, you could say. So GitHub recently at GitHub Universe released the ability to do what's called reusable workflows. And these are very kind of cool component of GitHub Actions or workflows where you can have a workflow file that can go and call a different workflow, as a job or a stage, and then come back to your original file and maybe go and call a different job. So what you can essentially do is you can carve up your, if you've got one big automation workflow, you can kind of carve this up into a more modular approach, and then you can kind of call the different workflows that you need, and they're reusable. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to have a workflow that is called main, and in that main workflow I'm going to have a job or a stage that is going to call a different workflow, and that workflow, if you see on this diagram, is going to be called new SaaS token. What that workflow is going to do is it's going to look at a Azure Service Bus queue. And for you who've not used Service Bus, it's basically a service in Azure that you can send messages to and you can queue them up. But to interact with this Service Bus, you need to you have something that's a token or a key, almost like a storage account. If you use Azure Storage, you will have storage account keys. But it's always, oops, I went through there again too quickly. So instead of using the keys, what we're going to use is a SaaS token. Now, what's nice about SaaS tokens is we can set a time validity against the token. So say, for example, when we are communicating with a service bus, or Azure Storage, and we want to do something with that service bus, like send a message to it, we can either use a key or we can create a token, and we can have the token for like valid, I don't know, for a month, for example. But what I want to show is how, as with automation, what we can do is we can generate a temporary token that's only valid for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And then that token we can store that in a key vault, and then come back to our main workflow. And then our main workflow can go to the key vault and just pick up that temporary SaaS token and use that to write to the service bus. So really what we're doing is we're automating the generation of tokens as almost like a child process of our workflow, or using a reusable workflow to do that. So let me just quickly jump to the next screen here. So, what is GitHub reusable workflow? So, reusable workflows are basically reusable. So you don't need to copy and paste code, workflow code from one repository to another. So what's nice about workflows is if you've got different repositories in GitHub and you have maybe different workflows, if you need, for example, a SaaS token, just a temporary SaaS token, you can then go and call a workflow that is hosted in a completely different repo or in the same repo, doesn't matter, in the org, to go and generate that temp token for you, store it for you in the key vault, and then you can access that token in your code or through your application. So reusable workflows can enforce context consistency across environments. And you can also, like I said, reference the centrally managed workflows across the org by basically using the users function, which we'll look at in a minute, with the user or the org / the repo name / a special folder called .github/workflows, and then the workflow file, and then whatever tag or branch the workflow is on. So I'm going to jump straight into this. I won't keep you with the slides, boring slides. I'm going to jump straight into the demo. So for this demo, I'm going to build some Azure resources. All we basically need to have, and you might have this in your environment already, is pretty much a key vault and a service bus is all the things that we need. So I've already logged into Azure here. I'm going to create a resource group called Actions Service Bus Demo in UK South. And then I'm going to create a key vault with a random, and I'm going to create a service bus namespace called GitHub Actions, and I'm going to create a queue in that service bus called Q1, and I'm going to create a auth rule. Now, what an auth rule or a policy is, basically, we are going to create a what we get out of an auth rule is we can assign a permission against service bus, like for example, listen or send. And we'll go through the options in a minute. But what this auth rule is going to do is it's going to create a primary and secondary key, almost like when you create a storage account, you get a primary and secondary key. And against that key is a permission. Your permissions will be either send or listen, or you can tweak whatever permissions you want on the auth rule. But we're not going to use this auth rule directly because, you know, it's a bit sensitive to use an auth rule because they don't really change often. What we're going to do is with the auth rule is we're going to use that to generate our tokens. You know, it's going to be based off this almost like key that we're going to just generate short-lived tokens whenever we need to send messages to the service bus. And we're going to do that through the reusable workflow. So I'm just going to put in these variables here real quick. And then I'm going to create the resource group in Key Vault. I'm just going to assign myself some access to the Key Vault as well so that we can look at the secrets when we set them up. And then I'm going to create the service bus namespace, the service bus queue, and that authorization rule. What I'm going to then do is that authorization rule, the key associated to that rule, I'm going to write that key to the key vault because we're going to reference that key to generate our tokens. So I'm just going to let this run, and it should just take a minute to set everything up. And then what we'll do as well after that is I'm going to set up a Azure AD application, because in GitHub, when we're connecting, you know, when we're working with Azure, we have to, I don't know if you've, for any of you who's used Azure DevOps, but you have service connections in DevOps that you can create a service connection that gives your pipelines access to Azure to do automation. So in GitHub, we kind of do a similar thing where we create an app and then we link the credentials of the app with the GitHub repository as secrets. And we'll use those that app to basically connect into Azure when our workflow is running, to be able to go to the key vault and get the primary key, generate the SAS token, and then put it back in the key vault so that the rest of our workflow can then go and pick up the temporary SAS token and write a message to the service bus. So that is still going. Let me quickly jump into Azure here, and we can just take a look what's happening. So here's our resource group. Let me just try and make this a little bit bigger. There's our resource group that I created, the Action Service Bus demo. And in here, like I said, we have a service bus called GitHub Actions, and we have a key vault with a random number at the end there. Now, if I go into the service bus, we can take a quick look at the shared access policies. Now, remember I said that we are going to create a shared access policy, and we're going to assign permissions against that. So just to show you here, my access policy is called my auth rule, and I've given it send and listen permissions or claims against this. Basically, if I go into it, you'll see here I've got a primary key and I've got a secondary key. But I don't want to use these keys directly. It's not really good security practice to do that because, you know, if that key gets leaked or compromised, you have to rotate the keys and it becomes a big nightmare. And also, there's, you know, these keys live forever. There's no time limit against them. So instead of doing that, what I am going to do is I'm going to generate a token based off that key. And that token will have the same claims, but it will be time limited. So the token will only have a limited lifespan. So there's my auth rule. If I go to queues, you see here I've got a queue called Q01. And you'll see on this queue, I don't have any messages yet. I've got 0 active messages. Now, as well, as part of building this service bus, I also built the key vault. And in this key vault is going to be that primary key. So my auth rule was called my auth rule. And this is the primary key. Because I'm going to use this in my GitHub workflow to generate a token based off this key. But this key is kind of super secret. I don't want anyone to know about it. And that's why I've put it in the key vault as part of the GitHub action. So if I just quickly jump back to this here. Now the next bit that I'm going to do is I'm going to generate that app that we're going to link GitHub with. So if what I'm also going to do is I'm going to give that app key vault secrets officer, because I need my GitHub workflow to be able to connect into Azure, go to my key vault, look at the primary key, and then generate a temporary SAS token based off that key. So my GitHub kind of workflow is going to be interacting with this key vault. So for that reason, when I'm creating the identity or the application service principal, I'm going to give that principal this role-based access control of key vault secrets officer onto that key vault that we just created. So I'm just going to run that real quick, and then I'll show you as well where that is being created in Azure. So if I just jump back into Azure here, so we've got the service bus, we've got our key vault, and then if we look at the Azure Active Directory at app registrations, we will now also see that GitHub Actions Vault user, which I've created. And if I jump back to the key vault here, and we look at the IAM permissions on this resource, you will see that there is my GitHub Actions Vault user application, and it's got key vault secrets officer. So it's only scoped to this key vault, my GitHub action. Now for the cool part, the GitHub part. Let me just try and make this a little bit bigger. It should be a bit better. So on my GitHub page, I've got a repository called Azure Service Bus SAS Management. And you can kind of come to this repo and use this as a template. I will do that now. I'm going to create a new repo just for this demo. I'm just going to call it, if we just call that service bus SAS demo. And I'm just going to call this to create temp SAS tokens for service bus on Azure. And it doesn't really matter if it's a public or a private repo in this case, because we're in one org, we can use reusable workflows across anywhere in the org. So it could be a private repo as well. I'm just going to create that, and then we're going to take a quick look at the workflows and the goodness of this automation. But before we do that, before we kind of start looking at the code, there is one more thing that I need to do. And in this new repo, the main, under the root of the repo, there's a special folder called .github. And in here, there's another folder called workflows. This is kind of, this folder structure or path structure is is unique to GitHub. You cannot call this something different. It has to be named specifically that. And what that does is it enables this Actions tab to show the different actions that we have, or the different workflows that we have. So you have to kind of, in the root of the repository, have a .github/workflows folder. But if we look at that main, I'm just going to quickly jump back to this slide here. We have a main workflow, and we have the new SAS token workflow. So these are two separate files. They're two separate workflows. So if I jump back to the workflows folder, you'll see there's the two different files. There's my main YAML file, and then there's the new service bus SAS token YAML file. If I just go to the main one here for a moment, you'll see here that I can trigger this workflow using workflow dispatch. What this gives me the ability to do is, if I go to actions and I go to send service bus message, I have an option here to run the workflow manually. That is what that means. If I just jump back to the code here, that's what this workflow dispatch trigger means. It means I can manually run this this action. And I'll come a little bit later back to this trigger, because in a real world example, you would want an application or something that's going to write to the service bus to basically trigger this. So I'll come back to this one in a little bit later. Now, the next section we have are jobs. Now, the jobs are similar to stages in Azure DevOps, where we can have one stage run and then the next stage based, if the previous stage was successful. So in GitHub, they're called jobs. And you'll see here that the very first job in my workflow is called new SAS token. And you see here, this is where we specify the users. Let me try and make that a bit bigger. Where we use the users. And what we're doing is we're saying that's the org or username. That's the repository. It's going to be .github workflows. And it's going to be that YAML file at master. So this is basically going to, what I will do is I will change this to this repo, but you can use this cross repos as well. So if you've got, for example, a repo with some workflows, and you have reusable workflows that can be used by other repos, you can kind of reference them across repos, which is quite nice. But you see here, it needs a secret, which is the Azure credentials. So this is for us to be able to connect into Azure. And you'll see this syntax being used here. This is how GitHub uses variables. But instead of variables, we're using secrets. And the secret is called Azure credentials. So what I need to do for my repository is under security, under settings, we'll go to the secrets, and for our actions, we're going to create a, oops, I'm in the wrong repo here. Let me just quickly jump back to the right one. It was called the Service Bus SAS demo. So in here, we'll go to secrets and then actions. And we're going to basically create a new repository secret. And we'll click on that. And remember, our secret needs to be called Azure credentials. Now, just jumping back to where I created that application, the one that's got the permissions to my Key Vault, this output would have generated a JSON body object, which I'm just going to copy here, because we're going to basically just paste this into our secret. But we only need the first 4 line items of the JSON object. So we basically only need the client ID, the secret, the subscription ID, and the tenant. And one important thing to note is when I add this, we can't come back to this. See, we can't look at it again. We can either update or remove it. So for example, there's no way for me to access these credentials again. So when you're creating the application, store those credentials if you need to access them again. Store them maybe somewhere safe in a key vault or something like that. But if they do change or if you need to reference them again, we won't be able to see it again. You can only update, which will be, you see there's nothing. So I'll just put the same object there. But yeah, just be aware that these secrets are kind of one time you can add them and then you won't be able to see them again. But just jumping back to the code here for our GitHub workflows, we'll have a bit of a closer look at what's happening here. So like I said, the first job is going to call that reusable workflow, and it's going to send in some secrets, which is going to be my Azure credentials, which we've literally just set up now. So if I go back to that file, to the new service bus SaaS tokens, because we're calling this workflow, you'll see that the trigger is different on this. The trigger on this is called on workflow call. This means that this workflow can only be called by another workflow. I can't come and manually run this or trigger this, or I can't do anything with this. I can only say a calling workflow can call this workflow, and we use that trigger to say that this workflow is basically a reusable workflow that can only be called by another workflow. And the secret that we need is called Azure credentials, and it's required. It's almost like a parameter. We're saying we need a secret variable called Azure credentials, and it's going to be sent in from the parent workflow. So it's going to basically come in here, and this can also have its own jobs. This workflow can have its own jobs, and we'll see here that the first job that we're going to do, and it's actually the only job, is it's going to create a new SaaS token. It's basically going to run on a Windows image, the automation. It's going to take the key vault that we created. It's also going to take the service bus namespace. Our namespace was called GitHub Actions. The auth rule, which is that permission, that key, which has got the send and listen permission or claims. And then what it's going to do is it's going to look for that primary key inside of my key vault. So for example, if I just quickly jump back into Azure, you'll see here that in my key vault, remember, I have the primary key, which is called my auth rule primary key. So it's going to basically look for this primary key using these environment variables. So let's look at the steps. So it's going to check out the code. It's then going to use the Azure credentials, secret credentials, to basically log into Azure so that we can access the key vault. What it's going to then do is it's going to connect to key vault, and it's going to go and look at the key vault based on the environment. So if I just scroll back here, that is my environment variable there for the key vault. So it's going to connect to that key vault, and then it's going to look for my SB policy key name. So it's going to look for that secret in the key vault. So it's basically going to retrieve that primary key from the key vault, and we give this step ID. We call it SB primary key. Now the next step is just pretty much going to be a PowerShell script. We're going to set some variables. We're going to create our key vault variable, our service bus namespace, the access policy name, which is called my auth rule, the primary, the key, the auth rule permission key. And then what we're going to do is you'll see here is another variable called steps, SB primary key outputs, and it's going to be that my author primary key, which is that key vault secret. So pretty much basically the output of this step, this step goes and gets the key vault, the primary key, and here we're assigning that primary key to a variable, because the next step, what we're going to do is we're going to generate a SAS token based off that primary key. And you'll see here that the token expiry date is going to be 10 minutes. Now we can change that to 5 minutes. We can change it to 2 minutes. It depends. Like I think 10 minutes is a good amount of time for a token to be valid, but you could make it 5 minutes, however you want. And then what we're going to do is that temporary SAS token that is going to be created, we're going to write that back to the key vault, but we're going to create a new key called basically the policy name, and we're going to tack on SAS token onto that temporary key. That way our main workflow can then go and fetch that temporary key and then to write to the service bus. So if I just jump back to my workflows, my main workflow is going to do all of that stuff. It's going to connect to the key vault. It's going to look at the primary key. It's going to generate a short-lived token, and it's going to write that token to the key vault. Now, the next step, I just want to show you that I've got a needs line here. Now, what needs mean? You'll see that this job is called new SAS token. Now, what the needs new SAS token means is it means that this step or this job must have finished successfully before my send service bus message job can run. So this will not run until that temporary SAS token has been created and is ready in the key vault. So that brings us to this step. So this step will then go and pretty much connect to the same, in the same way as the reusable token connects. But you'll see here, it's going to now look for my author SAS token in the key vault. So again, it's going to connect to Azure. It's then going to connect to the key vault, but it's going to look up, this time it's going to look up that temporary token. And then in here, I've got a demo, like a dummy message that I want to send to the service bus, which is just a body that says, hello, Actions Hackathon 21. And it's just going to write this message to the service bus. And it's, you see the token is going to be the output of the secret that has been retrieved from Key Vault, which is that temporary token. So we're creating a header that we're saying that the header is going to be an authorization header that is going to use that token to basically connect to the service bus. And then we're just going to write that message to the service bus. So before we can run this and show you everything that's going to happen, I'm just going to, because I've created a new repository here called Service Bus SAS demo, I'm just going to quickly update. All I need to do is just update a few files on here. I don't know if I can make this bigger. Let me just try and make this a little bit bigger so you can see. So basically, what I've done is I've just pressed dot at the root of the GitHub repository, and this actually opens a server Visual Studio Code in my web browser. So I don't even need to have. It's almost like code spaces a little bit. I don't need to go and install VS Code on my machine. I just can press the dot button and it opens VS Code for that repo on my web browser. So I can basically update a few files. Now, the only things I'm going to update is on my main YAML file, I want to just call the the project workflow, I'm just going to call that YAML file instead of going cross org. Sorry, cross project. So I'm just going to use, because it's in the same kind of project, you can use it in the same project or you can go cross project, doesn't really matter. But what I also want to do is I want to update the key vault. So in our case, the key vault that we built, the new key vault is called secrets-vault 7496. So I'm just going to update that. The service bus namespace is still called GitHub Actions. The queue is called Q01, and the auth rule that we're going to create, the temporary token is going to be called that. So the only things I really change is the repo and the key vault name. The rest will all stay the same. I'm also going to change that on my reusable workflow. I'm just going to say, the key vault that has got my primary key is that key vault. And just to show you, again, if we go and look at secrets, you'll see there's my primary key. So I just need to basically update my workflow with those variables. And I'm just going to save that. Bit of a delay there on my keyboard. So if I now jump back to the repo and we look at the files, I'll look at my new SAS token first and we'll see, okay, it's going to connect to that key vault, going to grab the primary key, it's going to log into Azure, it's going to create the temp token, it's going to go back to my main YAML file, and it's going to fetch that token and then write the message to the service bus. So let me run this. If I go to Actions and go to Send Service Bus Message, and I'm going to run this workflow here, and we should be able to see this kicking off in just a moment. Going to open that, and you'll see here's the two stages or the two jobs that I was showing you. This first job is essentially running a completely separate YAML file, which is my reusable workflow. So say, for example, I had different workflows. I don't have to go and copy and paste the same code in each workflow. I can just say, I have a workflow already that can generate tokens for me. Just go and call it, and it will go and generate a token for me. So this here is basically going to use that Azure credentials that we set up earlier, and it's going to connect into Azure, and it's going to then connect to the key vault, basically to get the service bus policy key, and then it's going to generate the SAS token. So just give this another few seconds. I don't know if there's any questions at this stage, Jackson?
No question. I just want to ask myself, it's pretty much the same question I asked last time. I believe from the GitHub, let's say, side, there is no need for any special license. Nobody needs to spend any money. What, let's say, everything you are showing us today is we can achieve just with those basic accounts. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's always a good
correct.
news. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know some people can be sensitive when it comes to paying different subscription, and if it's for free, is always a good news for everybody. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. So these automations that are running on if you don't have a GitHub Enterprise, if you just have a plain old free GitHub account, you get 2,000 minutes for free, and you'll see here.
I see.
You can obviously, the more you use it, I mean, if we look here, how long this is taking, let me just refresh it quickly, because I think it should be finished in just a moment. This doesn't take very long. So to generate the token, it took 1 minute. And I think to send the message, it's going to probably be 1 minute as well to
I
send
see.
that message.
Okay.
So this is 2 minutes, like you get 2,000 minutes for free. And the demo I'm showing you now is just taking one service bus, is one message and writing one message.
Uh-huh.
You can use what's called batching. So in your application is you can batch messages, and then you can use this, something like this workflow, to send a batch of messages all in one shot to
I
the
see.
service bus. But what's important, or what I want to kind of show here, is the functionality of reusable tokens. Sorry, not reusable reusable workflows, that we can basically detach certain like, rather than having one big workflow doing all of this stuff, we can break off into smaller components and reuse those components. Because something like generating a token is something that we can reuse in multiple different scenarios, rather than having the same code in one workflow and then the same code in another workflow and then the same code in another workflow. We can just kind of go and call that one workflow. And what's nice as well about this, for security reasons, is we're not using a long-lived key that can get exposed or stolen, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
We're generating a fresh code every time, and the code is only valid for 10 minutes. So let me.
Okay. Yeah, anyway, I just wanted to double check. Yeah, I can see now total duration 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Yeah, let's say out of 2,000 minutes. Oh my goodness, that's plenty of work that can be done. Okay, that's it. Yeah, thank you for the information.
No problem. No problem. So if we go back to the key vault here real quickly, let's just have a quick refresh, and you'll see now, instead of my auth rule primary key, we have generated a SAS token called my auth rule SAS token. So if we take a look at this token here, I'm going to just copy this into Notepad because I just want to show you what it looks like. So this token is based off my auth rule, and it's only valid. It's a shared access signature, which is only valid for 10 minutes. Now, that was basically done by the reusable workflow. If we, this first job, if we now look at the second job would have gone and taken this token and written to the service bus. So if we look at the service bus, we go to the queue, which was Q1. We can now see that we have one active message in the service bus. I'm going to run this one again, just to show you, it generates a new token every time. So I'm just going to, you see, so this one I cannot run manually because remember I said that the code is on workflow. Sorry, not on workflow. If I go back to the code here, my reusable workflow is using the trigger is on workflow call, so I cannot run it manually. So if I go to my actions, you see I cannot run this manually. It can only be called by another workflow. So I'm going to run this one again. Now, while that is running, I want to go back to the triggers here real quick. So if I just show this diagram here, I have a trigger that is a manual trigger at the moment. I am, manually triggering this workflow. It's calling my main workflow, which triggers the new SAS token. So this new SAS token can only be triggered by another workflow. That is going to generate the SAS token, put it in the key vault, and then go back to my main, and it's going to pick up the SAS token and write the message to the service bus. Now, when it comes to the trigger, in a real world scenario, I guess you don't want to go and manually trigger this workflow. You want maybe you have an application that needs to send messages to service bus. You want something outside of GitHub to be able to trigger your workflow to generate the token for you. that you can then use from, to put in your key vault, and you want to use it. So I want to show you, it's not part of this demo, but for people who are interested on the triggers, if I just quickly show you, for me to be able to manually run the trigger from GitHub, I use on workflow dispatch, and this gives me the ability to manually go and trigger this workflow. If you need to trigger this from something outside of GitHub, like an application, maybe a function app, or there is a way to do it, and the trigger is called repository dispatch. So what repository dispatch essentially does is you can basically call an API. It's a post request, so you can say you can use something like curl, or your application can send a post request to the GitHub API, and it's going to be the repo, / repos owner. Owner is like the org or the user, the repo, and dispatches. So if you post to this, make a API call to this, oops, let me make the screen a bit bigger. I keep on forgetting the screen is a bit small here. Let me go back. So if you do a post request, let me see if I can get it a little bit bigger. I think that's the biggest I will be able to do it. You can do this post request onto the GitHub API of your repository, and you can then basically trigger this workflow from outside of GitHub. So if you've got some application that needs to generate a SAS token for you to write to the service bus, you can always trigger your GitHub automation workflow using the repository dispatch trigger. If I go back up a little bit, one back actually, it's this one here. So instead of workflow dispatch, what I'm using here, you'll use repository dispatch, and then you can configure it to run based on an API call or post request to the API, to the GitHub API of your repo. So just to show you as well the second run, so this is run twice. I am in the wrong repository. Let me just quickly go to the right one. Just bear with me one moment. If we go to actions and refresh this. Okay, so that's still running. But if I go to my key vault, I just want to show you my SAS token now has a new entry, and I'm just going to copy this entry here. And this is from the second run. You see, it's a different signature or SAS token, and this one is also only valid for 10 minutes. And if we go back to the service bus and we look at the queue, you see now we have 2 active messages, and that is, that's all I really wanted to show for you today is this concept. It's a nice concept, and you can apply this concept in other ways as well. For example, I'm already thinking, one way I can use this is maybe to generate SAS tokens for storage accounts. So if you can have short-lived SAS tokens to do the same thing for storage accounts, maybe using GitHub reusable workflows. In my case, I'm using SAS tokens for service bus, but you can apply the same sort of concept in different ways if you maybe have a open mind and think about cool ways that you can do it. But yeah, I love GitHub reusable workflows in general, because it makes you break away from big monolithic workflows, and imagine you had 3 or 4 workflows. You have to repeat the same code in each of those workflows. Breaking it up into separate files that you can just call as jobs or stages is much nicer, and it's a long-awaited feature, I think, for GitHub, because this is something that's it's possible in most automation and DevOps toolings like Azure DevOps, for example. So it's really nice to have this in GitHub, and I can see this becoming very popular very quickly as more people start to use it. And that's that's my demo for reusable workflows.
Okay, yeah, that was really informative. I would say again, I managed to learn quite a lot. I actually have a question. It's not really connected to the subject, from today, but maybe people watching us now, from home. What sort of advice would you, let's say, give to the guys who don't have any scripting background, no, let's say, background as a developer? Because in order to build all that solution, there are lots of JSON files, lots of kind of that sort of language. How did you start, and especially for the guys who never done anything like that before? How would be the first, second, let's say, steps for them to get into the to understand those codes and start building solutions like that?
Yeah, so I would say if you learn, so for me, I would say try and learn a scripting language. So what I've shown you here today, you could probably do the same with the Azure SDK. So when I say Azure SDK, there is lots of tools out there, scripting tools and languages like Azure CLI, PowerShell for Azure. A lot of what I showed you now is basically just a PowerShell script. So I would say learn how to automate, maybe by writing a script. So for example, if you write on your laptop at home or your PC at home, try and write a PowerShell script or Azure CLI or some sort of language like automation scripting language to try and automate the generating a SAS token. I would say once you have that basic foundational scripting kind of under your belt, because what we're doing with GitHub workflows is basically that workflow is just a server in the background. It's just a server that is basically running your script. So there obviously for GitHub and also Azure DevOps, there is a very good documentation YAML. So workflows in GitHub as well as Azure DevOps, they use the YAML language, but it's a syntax that you have to learn. And all it is it's a configuration syntax. So what you can do is you can say, for example, I want to run on a Windows server, or I want to run on an Ubuntu server. And you just have to go to the documentation, the GitHub workflow syntax, GitHub Action syntax is very well documented on the GitHub documentation page, and Microsoft Docs as well has got really good manuals on how to write workflows. But those are just kind of, you're just utilizing that. So I would say for the core, what's happening is we're writing some PowerShell, and we're executing that PowerShell using automation, using workflow or actions automation or Azure DevOps automation. So if you're brand new, I would say learn a scripting language if you can, like PowerShell, and just write the script, and then try and think, how can you automate the script using something like GitHub? And then at that point, I would say go and maybe read the GitHub documentation on how to write a workflow or how to write GitHub Actions. I mean, I always look at the documentation for GitHub on the YAML syntax, like what it's a schema, so it's not going to be different. It's going to be things like on, and then we add a trigger like workflow dispatch, or on
Okay.
repository. These are not going to change. They're almost like configuration settings of a workflow. So just learning that YAML syntax and combining that with your scripting, you can do some automation like this. And
Okay.
yeah, I would say
And
just
yeah,
start.
there is no there is no magic. I kind of remember, for me, being a kind of, for my whole life I've been a kind of infrastructure guy, and then initially when I started working with PowerShell and command by command, and then starting to build some scripting scripts, using build my first let's say PS1 file. And of course you need to kind of start small and then eventually add more complexity and, let's say, get some examples, do the research, and kind of test and keep going. I would say, yeah, probably there is no magic for that.
Yeah. I mean, what's really nice about GitHub Actions for me as well, which is something totally amazing, is like in the last talk I came here, I wrote a public action that you can just go and use the action. You don't have to write your own PowerShell script.
Hmm.
So I would say also, if you're not comfortable with writing some PowerShell like what I've just did, say you just want to use the functionality, there are lots of GitHub actions in the public marketplace
I see.
that you can go and look at. That you can just say, maybe I don't know if there is for rotating service bus SAS tokens, but maybe there is. If there's not,
Hmm.
maybe I'll create one for someone to use. Then that user don't need to go and write their own workflow. They can just call the workflow from the public marketplace, almost like an extension. And then you don't even need to know the PowerShell underneath,
Uh-huh.
or whatever language is underneath. You're just utilizing the functionality. So I would say GitHub Marketplace, have a look there. You will be surprised. Maybe there are going to be actions that does all this stuff already, that you don't need to go and write your own
Yeah, start
PowerShell
from the
script.
scratch. Of course, that's what everybody's doing these days. Try to find if there is something already ready to go. Take as a template or an example, and then build from there. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good advice. Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
yeah, I just want to, before we go, just invite everybody for our next week session. Okay, next week is March 2nd. We have another, actually, it's going to be a series of session. The first one is how to become a cloud architect, part one, and then part two, part three. Basically, yeah, really interesting, especially for the guys who want to kind of build a career as a cloud architect. Yeah, please don't forget to join us starting from next Wednesday, and then we have two more, let's say, sessions on top of that. I think that's pretty much it for today. Thanks again very much for your time spending here with us and presenting to our community, Marcel Lupo. And I believe we will have you again at some stage next month, I believe.
yeah, yeah. We will do some more GitHub automations. It's going to be
Okay, great.
amazing.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much, everybody,
Thank you.
for joining this session. All the best. Stay safe. See you next
Yep.
time again.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay,
Stay
thank you.
safe.